Hello, thanks for coming, and I must thank Ruth and Brands for putting this evening on, and EMECO for supplying the chairs that you can all sit on. My name is John Small. I work at Foster Partners. I've been working there since 1985, and it seems like a long time sometimes, but my background is that I'm a product designer, and I started working at Foster's to work on a particular product which was for techno. And since then I've worked on a number of products, but also working on a number of interiors for Foster's. And in 1995, product design group was set up inside the office. There's only 6 of us. There's 3 of us here actually at the moment. There's James White sitting at the back, Claudia Danilon and myself. So actually there's only 5 of us, isn't it? Sorry, there's only 5 of us at the moment. And so what I put together here was a little story about how we came to meet up with EMECO, but also to give you a little bit of background of how the product design group fits into this very large organisation now, 1,100 people in Foster's, and the things that we've actually been involved with. So Claudia's my technical assistant for the evening as well. This exhibition, I don't know whether any of you went to see it at all. It was a travelling exhibition about Foster's, and it was really put together to try and encourage people to understand the process that we go through as designers, from the sketchbook or from the conceptual idea, taking it through from models to sketch models to more developed models. And it was really this idea of allowing somebody to get an insight into how designers work. Because Norman is actually quite concerned about this process and sees design, regardless of what it is, being quite important. Sorry, this as well. This idea of design and what design is. He doesn't really discriminate between designing a chair or designing a building. It's all part of this process. And this exhibition gave an idea of how the office actually worked. And you know where we worked out on the river in Battersea. This is the main working deck here. There's about 170 people work out on the single floor. And originally, when I joined the office, we were in Great Portland Street. And again, it was this idea of a single space where people could exchange ideas. And it was an easy idea for people to go along and have a look at what other people were doing. Unfortunately now, of course, we can't all fit in one room. And we're in a number of buildings in the area. But this is still the main working deck here. The next slide. And of course, there's a lot of different activities that take place in the office. And one of the things that I think that we all understand is this development of ideas through 3 dimensions. And you'd be surprised at how many models are actually created in the office, concerned with, regardless of what project it is, how many 3-dimensional sketches are made, even with the very sophisticated programs we have now on the computers. There's a lot of activity. There's 2 sketch model shops and 1 major model shop, and it still forms very much an integral part of the design process that we have. And of course, with so many people now, this happened before to us. We don't know why it's been happening. And of course, not only are there architects working there, but there's product designers, interior designers, space planners, the model makers themselves, a big graphic design group. We have our own publishing and communications group as well within the office. But Norman talks about there being no specialization, and it's all about diversity and the synergy of the design principles. And there's nothing too large and nothing too small. I was working on the interiors of Jet Black Cock at the same time as I was working on the door handle. And this idea of scale is something that the office enjoys. And it's something which is why I've probably stayed there for the amount of time that I have, because I'm currently working on projects in America, as well as working with the design team on product development. Some of the architectural projects that we just go through, like the Reichstag in Berlin, which I worked on. This is the entrance to the Jubilee line at Canary Wharf. Next slide. This is, of course, the bridge across the Thames. This is giving you an idea of the kind of breadth of work that we undertake. This is wind turbines for a German company. This is, of course, the Great Court at the British Museum. recent building up in the northeast of England, Sage Arts and Music Centre. And this is the Millau Bridge in the centre of France. And more recently, an inserted library in the New University in Berlin. Very low-cost building this was. This was inside an area that had become abandoned in the centre of the museum. This is Beijing, which opens later on in the year. And finally, this is the Hearst building, which I also was working on the interiors and developing some of the systems for the building. And of course, with the breadth of work inside the kind of architectural work, how does the small design group operate? So if you can, designing products is something which Norma says is easier, but I would say it's equally as difficult. So you can go to the next slide. This was something which I put together. You can't really read it, but it's about sort of what happens when you're designing something and all the things that you bring together, your past, things that have inspired you, moments of conversations with people, and then suddenly when you're working on a design, subconsciously you're bringing all these bits and pieces together, and they enter this funnel somewhere, and eventually through the funnel the product or whatever it is you've been designing emerges, and you're never really sure of where it's all come from. And it can be from a minor thing, but it's the accumulation of knowledge that we all have that eventually starts allowing this design process to take place and these products to emerge. What I've done is, next slide, these are some of the things that we've worked on since 1995, or actually the table in the middle is one of the family of the objects that I first started working on when I joined the office, the nombre system for techno. But some of these things, which are the lights of Fontana Arte, or the sofa systems that we've done for Walter Knoll, the Vitra airline system for airports and waiting areas, the ceramics for Duravit, and this door handle on this side is for a small British company called Trapex. And so you can see even within the product design, working with different groups of, different types of companies and different groups of people. The thing for me about product design really is getting to know the people that you're working with on a slightly different way than architects get to know their clients, because you're actually involved with them inside the companies for quite a period of time. It's very interesting to get to know how the companies work, get to know the people that you're involved with, and of course you're with them in a very different relationship because it's a shared relationship. You're both trying to work towards the same thing. This is, more recently, I've worked on a restaurant in St. Moritz, and the reason why I put this slide in is that we developed these lights inside the office, and it was through this photograph, in fact, that a company contacted the office and asked whether, in fact, the lights were being produced by somebody. So some things come to the office not through design, as it were, or not through the pursuit of a client, but even through a photograph in a magazine. And these now become a product being developed by a company called EMECO in Italy. The next slide. And of course, we also, this is what I was talking about, developing systems. This is inside the Hearst building, where the product design group worked on the interior installation here, at least the office stations. And we worked closely with the client, developing a product specifically to the way that they worked. This installation was done by Steelcase, which coincidentally at the same time we were developing a product with. But in fact it was a different group and a different way of working. But some of the products that we develop are actually to do with the building, and they don't emerge from the building at all. The next slide. And of course some of them are experimental. This was a product that we developed with Poltrona Frau. It started life as an airport seat and ended its life as this, and it's somewhere in their archive somewhere, which it'll probably never be made. There's only one of them. Some people say, thank goodness there's only one of them, but anyway. But these are the different kinds of companies that we work with, and these are the logos, because one of the things that's quite interesting about product design is the relationship of the brand. Ruth's company is called brand, but this relationship between the Foster brand and the brand of the company is also something that really doesn't take place, as it were, with the architectural side. And we have to be quite careful sometimes about the way that the brands come together and the way the brands are used. So I've taken four projects. All of them started in a very different way. We started working with Steelcase in 2000, the year 2000, and we were not asked to design a product for them. We were working with their research department in Grand Rapids. And what we were doing was digging into the kind of research that they were doing into life inside offices. And all we were doing was playing the game of, well, have you ever thought of, and it wasn't really designed at all to develop a product. 9/11 came along, and there was incredible fallout in America, and not only because of what had happened in New York, but economically and financially, a lot of projects were stopped, and a lot of the companies, particularly the furniture companies, were very badly hit by the effects, the economic effects from 9/11. And we lost contact really with Steelcase, only for Steelcase Europe to ask us to look at developing a product with them. And this was the first attempt. This is from the sketchbook, where we were looking at this kit of parts to develop this project. And what happens inside the office is that we also, this is part of the sketch model development, going back to the idea of the three-dimensional design being important. We just started working with things which are just pieces of wood and cardboard, on this idea of developing a product which was a vertical product, allowing different levels of area to be created on this idea of a bridge. This was from one of the things that we were making. The next slide. And all of these are cardboard and plastic models that we made because we were given a very short deadline by Steelcase, because Steelcase had their own plan, as it were, that in the year 2004 they would actually have a huge exhibition in Cologne, and at that exhibition they would say goodbye to the idea of doing exhibitions, and they would concentrate on a very different way of going into the marketplace. And so they gave us a very quick deadline. This is some of the renderings we did on some of the developments of the product. And some of you may know the product, which is called Forward, which is the next slide. And it was this idea of creating the ability to have inner spaces inside offices, which is this post and beam system, connecting to a secondary distribution for all the electronics, which was in this bridge system. The product was designed for buildings with no raised floor. It was designed to actually receive a tremendous amount of wiring into the product, and also removing the technology from the workstation and placing it on these work surfaces. So all the power and data were coming through these bridges here. The next slide. The next one. Sometimes things generate from inside the product group itself. And the chair that we developed for Randers in Denmark, again, quite a small company in Denmark, was generated by really a series of models which were done by a member of the team, a guy called Mike Holland. And every time we had an idea, we would just make a 1 to 5 model. And these are made out of bits of plastic and cardboard and things. And we started looking at this product because inside the office, we've been working on a number of interiors that were requesting a particular type of product, which was a stackable, fairly anonymous chair that could be used in different types of materials that would be fairly easy to produce. And it was something that was, if you like, developed completely without a manufacturer in mind. When we started the prototypes, which is the next one, this is a rendering, and we'll wait for the. This is a rendering of the chair. If you go to the next slide. And this is our full-size model of the chair. This one you couldn't sit on, this was plastic, but it gave us an idea of what the form and the shape of the product should be, and how simple we could make, or we anticipated the manufacturing of it. It's turned out to be more difficult than we thought, but anyway, it's another story. Next, and here it is when it was launched. This was, again, Randers had the background was a company that had come through developing products for the educational market, and they had moved into sort of universities through using a number of designers from Denmark. and we were the first designers to work with them from outside Denmark. So it has a tipping device which is to conform with the new regulations in Germany to do with linking chairs in auditorio areas. Next slide. The next one is this is working with a company called Dada. They're owned by Molteni, who own Unifor. And Molteni, there are two brothers. There used to be three, and unfortunately, the third brother died. Who used to run Dada, the kitchen company. And we'd been interested in kitchens. If you go to the next slide. Why I say it was a response to a conversation was, it was a conversation with Norman. We were developing a kitchen for him, for one of a house in the south of France. And we were looking at the way he and his family, a young family, were using the kitchen. And one of the things that was happening, of course, is that the kitchen became this center for the whole of the family to come together, move apart. You know, people, children working on computers or television, people preparing food. And we started trying to incorporate ideas that we'd been working on a number of other projects about the whole idea of working, sitting, working, standing. And we thought that there was a way of incorporating this into activating the way the kitchen could work. And so what we did is we cut down an old drawing board and started playing with the idea of what would happen if the kitchen, all the kitchen surfaces were able to move up and down, including where the sink was. We had to abandon that as it happened as we went through, which is unfortunate because afterwards we realized there was a way of doing it. But anyway, we'd also been working on kitchens. This is a kitchen from a boat project that we worked on, and this is a kitchen from a housing development next door. I'm sorry about the quality of the slide, but it was quite dark. And working in these things and working with Norman, having conversations with Norman about the life inside the kitchen, we contacted Piero Molteni, and he came to the office. And Piero is an amazing person and very, very inventive, and he's the person behind Unifor. And we started talking then about what the possibility was of developing a kitchen that actually wasn't a fitted kitchen. It was a kitchen that you bought components from. And we developed 5 working components with them. There was always the service wall, which is this one at the back, which actually houses all the plumbing and the electrics and everything else that go into the way the kitchen works. And this island device, which houses refrigerators and also has this ability to raise and lower the work surfaces. And if you go to the next slide, we've used the kitchen in a number of our residential installations. Not only this one's in Italy, but also in America, and it's also now being considered for another project as well. But what the idea was is that it wasn't a fitted kitchen. You bought components 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they were installed, including this table, which actually has this raising and lowering device, and it has its own power pack inside. It was really interesting, and a lot of the invention came from Unifor, because that's the other thing about the product design development, is this issue of collaboration. And the collaboration side of it, where you, or we as designers and the manufacturer, because their knowledge and our knowledge, and that's the way that we try and develop the products in this idea of collaboration between ourselves and the manufacturer. And now, I come to the story of why we're here. I was in Chicago at a trade fair called NeoCon in 2005. And I'd just been to a meeting with Steelcase and came out of their showroom and met this person here. And the connection between, this is the merchandising mart where NeoCon's held in Chicago. And the connection between the 3 elements, which is NeoCon, a lift, and Greg Bookfinder, who actually owns EMECO, was the fact that I was going in the lift, and Greg and Dan Fogelson, who's the one of the central people inside EMECO as well, was coming out to the lift. And I knew Dan Fogelson through a mutual friend of ours, and I used to work in America in the same company as Dan. And we'd met through this mutual friend of ours. And of course, Dan comes out, he's quite distinctive, and he comes out and he says, hello, John. And oh, hello, Dan. And we hadn't seen each other for, I don't know how many years, maybe, sort of 1984 or something like that. And now we're in the year 2005, and obviously both of us have changed, but both of us recognize him. And he said to me, this is Greg Bookbinder. He owns EMECO. EMECO, the Navy chair. And of course, I was just come out of this meeting. I was wanted to get into the lift, and the lifts are really difficult in NeoCon. And I was desperate to get in the lift. And I said, oh, hello. And Dan introduced us, and Greg said, oh, hi, and he gave me his card. And he'd just been down for a talk. He'd been giving a talk in NeoCon. And he said, would you like to design a chair for us? And I said, oh, yeah, sure. Here's my card. And that was it. This was the link here. EMECO, in the guise of Greg, arrived on our doorstep. Very short period of time. It was literally, I'm here at the front door, and you did say you were going to design a chair for us. Of course, then we started really sort of going into EMECO's background and realizing that this company was a very unusual company indeed. Not only historically, but the way that it actually processed its products. And this advertisement, which I think was used on the invitation to tent, gives you an idea of the background of EMECO, because it started in very peculiar circumstances, and also through a metallurgic process that is incredibly unusual. And when Greg showed us the CD of the 77 steps, it became more intriguing about what on earth we were going to do with them, because this chair, this iconic chair, and if you go into CSI Miami or CSI whatever it is, in the interview rooms, there's always one of these chairs. And of course, historically, the way that they were developed, it was intriguing. This chair is the Hudson chair by Philippe Starck. And again, Philippe Starck, Greg realized that he had an admirer in Starck, and Starck came to EMECO to develop the chair for the Hudson Hotel. Again, a very successful product. And of course, the chair that Frank Gehry did for them as well. So Greg had been in touch with a number of fairly famous sort of designers or architects to talk about the possibility of developing product with them, and of course it had worked. So why was Greg coming to us? And so these two people, Greg Bookbinder here, and Dennis Tangen, who actually runs the factory and is responsible for the development of all these products, because he actually makes them himself. And the prototypes are made by Dennis, and he develops them, and then they go out onto the floor. The combination of these two characters, the historical nature of EMECO, and this very odd process that the products themselves have to go to be able to do what they do, was very intriguing. So I came back after all of this, the next slide, and started talking to the design group within Foster's about developing a product. And these reviews that take place are, they are to do with whether we should do products or not, or whether we should do this particular product. It's part of a sales thing that goes on, if you like, inside the office. And I was saying, look, it's so unusual, this company, that it's going to be great. It's going to be a really good adventure for us to go along. So it was agreed. So what should we do? And the thing was that I suggested that we do a chair, surprisingly enough, but a real chair, not something that was an experimental piece, not something that was a piece that was taking elements from the existing components that EMECO themselves were manufacturing, because the Hudson chair is a very clever use of an existing range of components that Starck saw when he was in the factory. And what I thought was a good idea at the time was that we did a transitional piece. And this transitional piece was using the techniques that EMECO have, but in a more contemporary way. So the product itself had a relationship with now rather than a relationship with the past. And that was the thing that we suggested to EMECO, again from the sketchbook, looking at this object. And it's always difficult to come to a conclusion about a product, but trying to keep the product as anonymous as possible, because that was one of the things that Norman was insisting upon, that it was a chair that had character, but at the same time you could use lots of them. So it had to have a level of anonymity and at the same time have a character. So when you saw the individual chair and when you saw the chair together, there was a different response. So the next, and again, we did a lot of the development back in the Foster office. We're not only sort of doing the chair frames that were sent over from EMECO by Dennis, and we were fitting the seat and the backs to try and start working things out, but also we came to the conclusion that the only way that we could ever get the form that you see, this little line that runs around the chair, and the way that the dishing was, is to actually manufacture one of the pieces ourselves. So we did this on the CNC machines where we did vac forming from the molds. We also had the idea of the chair reflecting an aeroplane wing, and we decided that we'd rivet the chair rather than line welding it. And this is the only chair that exists with this device on, because it proved to be so expensive to do exactly the same as the airline did, which is this flush riveting device. And Dennis called me and told me off about this because he said, we just can't go down this route, honestly. But it was a beautiful piece, and people who've seen it have said, you know, how many are they going to make? And as Dennis said, only one. And I think, but these reviews take place, you know, reviews with Norman. This was the first chair that had come from a semi-production process. Dennis had been making a number of chairs to try and see what was going to happen as it went through the 77 steps. And this was in the office here. You see Greg, when we were about to sign the chair off so that they could go into the next phase. This is Dan Fogelson here. This is in they have a wonderful factory in Hanover, Pennsylvania. It's near the Gettysburg. It's near Gettysburg battlefields, and it's a fantastic experience if you ever get the opportunity of going out. Gettysburg is an unusual place. Hanover is even more unusual, but Gettysburg, because of its relationship with the, with this incredible scenery where the battlefields were. But the factory has this wonderful museum where all these bits and pieces and changes that have been made by the designers that have been working with EMECO are in this one room. And, but it is a very hand-crafted piece. Even though the processes themselves, as they move through the factory, it's a very hands-on process that takes place. And it's a rather unusual experience as a designer to go into an environment like this where the people who are making it are really making it. And it's not something which you see as a designer very often, unless you go back into craft. And this is the object itself is a strange piece because they are craft industrial pieces that are produced. And then finally, it's quite exciting, and it's the bit that I also love, is seeing lots of the product being manufactured. So, this was the last meeting that I went to in Hanover. Greg had given me a call talking about the fact that he thought we needed a family of objects, not just a chair. And he wanted them for the Milan Fair. So these are all 1 to 5 models. And so we did a whole series of 1 to 5 models with a stool that you're sitting on, the tables. And also, if you go to the next slide, these are from the sketchbook, if you go to the next one. Also, when I was in the room, Greg said, I think we need an armchair as well. So I got some paper together and just put the arms on the chair. And Dennis said, oh yeah, sure. And that's the armchair that you see here, where it's slightly more refined than the paper thing. But it's been a wonderful experience working with EMECO, not only because of Dennis and Dan and Greg, but all the people that they've managed to make contact with, like people like Ruth, who isn't unusual inside the EMECO family. Everyone's very enthusiastic about the product. They love the idea of the history of the organization and also what Greg's trying to do with the company now. And I hope that the chair that we've worked on with them is this transitional piece, which allows a much broader range of products to be grouped together as a family of pieces rather than sort of individual pieces, I suppose. If you go to the next slide, when we were in Milan, this presentation that you see here is a smaller part of it. Of course, the response to the whole collection was incredibly good. And Greg was right that, sitting us down and saying, we need a family of pieces to go. The collection needs to be, high table, low table, stool, arm, unarm, upholstered, unupholstered, and he was right. Excellent. This is the first piece from the production. Norman sort of, that was the other game that we played. We wanted to be lighter than the Frank Gehry chair. And it is. But as you know, these things are all a bit strange. What we only ever see is up here somewhere. But as designers, we all know that underneath there's far more to the story than just the object that you're sitting on. Anyway, thank you very much. We started, I met Greg June 2005, and the first pre-production piece was signed off in 2000, end of last year. That's right, you were here last year, 2006 with Norman. Yes. When was that? September?
Yes.
Yeah, September 2006. And then Greg got on the phone and said he needed the other pieces by Milan, so I suppose 2007 is when the collection was complete.